My name is Gooreka Okahaabwa. I am a clinical psychologist coordinating the counseling program, and I was requested to come and introduce to you the intersection between public policy and psychology. So that is what we'll be looking at today. Now, some of you may think, what is there in psychology? What is the relationship? But as we go through the different ideas, you'll see how close, how interrelated, how the intersection works. Now, on your course outline, there are a number of ideas. I think there was leadership and followership, there was attitudes, there was a number of things. But each one of those topics is a whole class, a whole 3-hour class. So I just chose one that we'll look at, and then I'll ask you to go and if you're interested to look up some more information on the other topics. So we're going to look at attitudes more. Today we're going to look at attitudes and changing attitudes. I sent you some information to read. I am hoping you read it. I'm wondering how many people got a chance to actually read it. The one that we're going to talk about is the information on vaccinations and parents' attitudes on vaccinations. And as we talk about it, I want you to be thinking, what are the implications for public policy, developing public policy, changing people's attitudes to be able to actually implement, for the implementation of the public policy to be successful. So starting with this article, which was written by someone called Ayodele Samuel Jegedi. This article is about the Nigerian boycott of the polio vaccination campaign. I don't know if any of you heard of it at one point. So this is the main, within the African region, the whole African continent, there was a push to kick polio out of Africa. And lots of important people were part of it. This is 2003, so I'm not sure. So 2003, Nelson Mandela was alive at that time and he was part of the campaign. Many people got into it, they got excited about it, many countries got into it, and I think Uganda also participated. Now, it appears the situation in Uganda is very different from the situation in Nigeria. Do we have any Nigerians in this group who can tell us exactly what happened? No? None? Okay. We'll see, we'll read from the article. So as they started the campaign in Nigeria, I'll request that after this you actually read it and fill in all the gaps. I'm just paraphrasing. As they started the campaign in Nigeria, some northern states decided they were not going to have anything to do with it. And if you've seen or heard anything about Nigeria, they have traditional leaders who are really powerful, they have religious leaders, and they have the political leaders as well. So all three decided we are not going to have anything to do with this immunization. And the main reason they gave was these vaccines have been infected with the HIV virus. These vaccines have been infected with, I forget the name of the hormone, but it's a hormone that reduces fertility in females. So they said they've been infected with that hormone. So if we give it to our children, especially the girls, they're trying to reduce the fertility. Now, at the same time, at the time this was running, just before, there had been a push to roll out family planning, like to limit families to at most 4 children. Now, for many countries, that is many. For Nigeria, that appeared like, especially in the northern states where they're mainly Muslim, it appeared like they want to limit us, they want to reduce our numbers. So when the polio vaccination campaign came up, they categorically refused to be part of it. They campaigned against it. They told their people in their congregations, people in their mosques, people in their communities, do not go for that thing. And what do you think happened? They didn't go. And the problem with the polio is that once everybody is immunized, it reduces. But if some people are not, it appears, as the article says, it appears that some of the strains grew stronger, the types of the types of polio. A new strain came up, and even the one that they had was more resistant to the drug. So they say that now, when other children in other countries in Africa are immunized, they go maybe like 5 times. For Nigeria, you have to do about 8 to 10 times for the vaccine to actually work. But at that point, it failed. The campaign against polio failed. So it took a lot of work. The government, the religious leaders, international organizations. At one point, they said, we want to be able to choose our own country, Muslim country, that we will send the vaccine to be tested for us to know that it is not infected with HIV, it does not have that anti-fertility hormone. And they agreed, the scientists agreed, they sent it to Indonesia, they sent the samples to Indonesia, and they came back. And after that, the situation calmed down a little bit, and more people started going for vaccinations. But this is one example of a policy that people had. I'm sure you've learned about how policies are made, how they come about, until that point where it is rolled out and they say, the whole country will have to immunize. We are going to provide the resources, the manpower, and every child must be immunized. When it gets to that point. But in this case, we see it got to that point, but it completely failed because there were other things that maybe the policymakers, the policy developers had not taken into consideration. So, let's go to okay, so a few questions to guide our discussion. What attitudinal issues do you see in that scenario? We've looked at just the polio campaign. The other article was about immunization in general, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa, in Asia. The same idea. If the elders, the leaders, the parents are not for it, it fails. And yet, so much money has been put into developing this policy. It fails. So the first question is, what do you see as issues to do really with attitude? Not so much the policy, but with the attitude. And after this, we'll look at what is an attitude, what are the components of an attitude, and how do you go about trying to convince people when you think a policy should be followed. Yes?
The Northerners accuse the Southerners of marginalizing them. And it could be one of the reasons why Boko Haram came into play, because then it was advocating for the interests of the Northerners. Now, the fact that religion, more so religious fundamentalism, can drive us to a certain degree of creating our own attitudes that are based on bias, that even if so-and-so has a good intention, I will take it that this person possibly wants to annihilate our race with the Muslims, and then they can effectively rule us for all that long. So the attitude issue here is rooted in the political context. Religion advances that, and I believe that those attitudes can be changed once some good explanations are given, like they did. They had to accept that these people, let us do what you want. Let's go take to Indonesia, because Indonesia is a serious Muslim country.
Yes.
And indeed, the people had to embrace that. We look at this divide that even in Nigeria, when the president is Christian, the vice president should be Muslim. That is the understanding we have, though it's not constitutional. So that's how I can.
So for them, they have these divisions and they acknowledge them. They are not hiding them. They are not saying, no, let's just try to work together. And so they listen, like we saw in the article. They were able to listen. This is something that may be based on religion, that may be based on bias, that people are trying to marginalize us, but because it is affecting a very serious issue, the health of the children. And children died because of the children were paralyzed, children died because they had not been vaccinated. So because they realized the magnitude, they agreed, let's listen to these people and let's do what they want, what they would want to be done so that we can improve the situation. What else? What are the...
just again add on what I've said. Even still education, when Boko Haram came up, it said, Western education is bad. It's rooted in unreligious beliefs. They said girls should not go to school. And no wonder Boko Haram went on to fight and it disorganized so many things. So policy issues surrounding education, health can easily be curtailed if at all attitudinal issues are not addressed.
Go ahead.
I personally think it could have been culture, maybe their culture, and the fact that people listen or confine in their leaders more than anybody. I think they realized what, even if they are being told, even if they're not being told the truth that about the vaccine, they are just going to abide because they know these are their leaders.
That's a very important issue.
Sure.
As people grow to become policy developers.
Sure.
Who are these people listening to? You may stand there and talk the whole day, but if you don't have the confidence, they won't listen to you. They may sit and listen, but go back and do what their cultural leader or their religious leader, someone they actually put confidence in, has said to you. Yeah. Any other ideas? The next question. How have these issues affected public policy, which we may have touched on a bit? This was a policy to do with vaccination, immunizing the whole country, actually the whole Africa. They were trying to roll it out in the whole of Africa. But as far as Nigeria was concerned, that northern part of Nigeria, they said no, there are a number of states, the three or four states, they said no, we're not going to have any of this. And because of that, as I mentioned earlier, the polio continued, which was the hope was that it would be stamped out completely. It continued to spread, and even stronger strains of polio developed. And the article goes on to say that it even spread further than just Africa. The Muslims went on what is it called? Yes, they went to Mecca, they went to, there's migrant labor, they went to work in other places, and these strains that are endemic in Nigeria were found in other places because they had not been immunized. How should the persuasion message be prepared so that it has a long-lasting effect? So if you were thinking of those people, those parents, those children, how would you package a message to persuade them that, this is immunization, please come? How would you, what would you consider?
To me, I have a feeling that attitude is mental. So before you package that message, therefore, it would require that you first study the reason, the cause. Why are they behaving like that? What could be the aspects they believe in, and then you capitalize on those aspects to package your message.
So a big part of it is mental, as you said, understanding what is it that is going on as far as what they understand, what they believe. What else? Yes, go ahead.
I think the government approach matters a lot. How you respond to people's attitude first is also important. The government here made a mistake. The first mistake it made, it went ahead and killed Mohammed Mohammed Musa in public, the founder of Boko Haram. And now resistance accelerated. The first thing they should not have done was not to kill him in public. Because when police arrested him, decided to shoot him in public. Changing people's attitude means, if at all they have been violent and have been resistant, I would believe the government would, one, approach them in a more cordial manner. The Mohammed Musa I'm talking about is not all that was not all that educated, but they believed in him. Leaders came from as far as Chad to listen to his sermons as a Muslim leader. Now, whereas you could be a professor who is advancing a policy, and yet the people have someone who is possibly a P2 graduate, and he has excessive clout, definitely you had first consider him to be included so that he can be part of the whole program. And I think this can convince the people to know that since our leader is part of this program, then I think it's something good for us.
So going back to the idea of who has the power, who has the influence in this group,
yes,
who will push our agenda, so to speak, for it to be understood and actually supported, rather than coming as government and everything that we say must pass.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like also to bring this to our own, context. This is when I first heard about the immunization campaign in Uganda. Very many parents did not want their children to be immunized. And even when the children were at school, they would come for them to take them away from school. It reached a level where government could send its officials to their homes, but still parents could hide their children. So when you talk about attitude, this is something very big that has diverse causes. But I would also want to believe that as government comes up with a policy, of course there must have been different studies, different tests, especially such health kind of campaigns. So I would just add that the instruments that government has, like legislations, can be put in place, information being given, how a policy is communicated is very important. Because just like Hosea 4:6 says, my people perish because of lack of knowledge. Most people don't have knowledge as to what causes what. They attain most of the issues that we go through, they attain it to certain witchcraft. Maybe even the issues of polio and HIV, they might be attaining it to a certain god somewhere to have caused such calamities. So they want to have cultural interventions to such problems, even when they are medical problems.
Okay. Thank you. The next two questions. How can these changes be facilitated and how can they be maintained? And if you think about our own situation, just like you said, remember when the HIV campaign had just started and there was so much talk about it. And then slowly by slowly, we lost gas, it seems. How could we have maintained that? Is it possible? Is it possible to maintain the changes that happen? How can they be facilitated? Because when we talk about something like policy, once it's put forward and it's being implemented, the hope is that it will be rolled out, it will become like a permanent fixture in different places, and the good that comes from it will continue. So the idea is it should be maintained. So how do we maintain these changes? How do we facilitate them to begin with, and how do we maintain them?
I think in the first place is to find out, just as we've been saying, who are the stakeholders in this. And after identifying the different stakeholders, it will take us time to put them on board, to make them aware of what is going on, through informing them, training them, and then it is these people that will be able to promote it. Otherwise, if the few stakeholders, especially the leading people in every other group, if they don't buy it, then it will not be sustained. And this will cause policy failure at the end of the day?
I would like to answer that in a way that I'd look at the numbers in terms of age.
Mm-hmm.
The young, the youth, and the elder, depending on where, on which country. For example, in a country like Uganda, we see that the biggest number of the population are the youth. So I personally think if we started by informing the youth about if we started informing the youth about what is going to happen, or a campaign in anything, I think it would help on
So information, just providing information.
providing information to the biggest number of people in the country, of the biggest age group.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What do others say? How else can these changes be facilitated, maintained?
To my thinking, I think it goes on to the aspect of participation.
Mhm.
If you involve these people, having studied their attitude, and you involve them to take the thing themselves, you engage them in the process, one, it becomes easier to facilitate in terms of resources, and two, since it is them participating, they maintain it. They have to maintain it and keep it going. So participation, I think, is at different levels of policy making, would do both facilitate and maintain it.
Okay.
I think also policy appraisal is also important, that you can follow up and you do some analysis of the policy, how effective has it been, and then you can then have results to know, to possibly draw a roadmap, how you can counter the challenges you're facing and how you can really address what is failing. I can give an example of current youth livelihood program. It is having so many challenges because I think the policymakers, in my own words, could be possibly not identifying some of the issues that are causing these challenges. Why are youth refusing to pay back the money they borrowed, and yet when they were going to borrow it, they were going to borrow it with willingly, but currently they are running away with the money. Why? These are issues. Why are others considered more and then why are others left out? So someone comes to borrow the money with the intention that if I get it, I will have got it, and that will be it. That's what I think.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to look at what are attitudes, what are the different components. So I challenge you to be thinking as we go through, thinking about health issues, like health policies, like we've just discussed. But it goes beyond just health, because any policy that would be developed and people and the government and the policymakers want it implemented, you need to find a way to be able to convince people that, especially if they are against it in the first place, to persuade them that this is what needs to be done and this is how it should be done. Okay. So an attitude, the psychological definition of an attitude, is a relatively stable evaluative response to an entity or situation and viewed as consisting of three components: affective, cognitive, and behavioral. So the affective is, in simple words, someone's liking for a situation or an entity. In the case of immunization, someone has a liking, a desire for their children to be healthy. So there is that, it's like you're drawn towards it. You think it can actually be beneficial. The second part is the cognitive component, which is a person's belief and knowledge about an entity or a situation. In the case of the vaccinations, was information actually given? This is the medicine, this is the vaccination, the vaccine, this is what it consists of, these are the side effects, these are the effects, these are benefits. We are not so sure. So the cognitive component, what happens here in the head, what someone actually thinks and believes about something. And then there's the behavioral component. So the affective, which is the the desire, you're drawn towards something. And the cognitive usually results in someone doing something, actually behaving in a certain way. So in the situation we just discussed, they were convinced that this vaccine had anti-fertility elements, it had HIV virus. So for them, that was the knowledge that they received. And they believed it because the people who told them were respectable in their societies. They were people they thought they were doing good. They had, up to that point, they had been working for their good. So the behavioral component was, we do not appear at those immunization campaigns. We don't even go anywhere near it. I've actually had at least 2 incidents on radio, just news stories, of nurses, doctors, people who had gone out on immunization campaigns, who have been killed, actually murdered, and they were killed because they seemed to be pushing an agenda that the people did not agree with. This wasn't in Nigeria in particular. I think one was in Asia somewhere, India, somewhere like that. So there's a behavioral component. So 3 parts: the affective, the cognitive, and the behavioral. Very often when the word attitude is used by lay people, it's focusing more on the affective, the liking, the drawing, the desire. But as far as psychology is concerned, it consists of all 3. So people tend to evaluate attitude-consistent information as being more convincing and valid than attitude-inconsistent information. So if I have a liking for something, I'm already convinced about something. If I receive information that is consistent with that, it's also supporting what I support, it's adding on to my desire for this thing, people usually evaluate it as more convincing and more valid than one that challenges them. Is that true in your own experience? When you hear something that is confirming what you think, in your mind, it's like you say, yeah, it's more convincing, it's more valid. As soon as you hear something that challenges what you think, the first impression is, no, it can't be true. So what is consistent with your attitude is usually considered more convincing and more valid. Then when people are familiar with both sides of an argument, they remember supporting and conflicting information about equally. So if you were maybe preparing for a new policy, and it has its pros and it has its cons, their advantages and their disadvantages, what this idea is saying is, if you provide information that disadvantages and the advantages equally, people will be able to remember this information about equally, the supporting and the conflicting. But if you do the opposite, if you produce only one side, you produce only the supporting, only the conflicting, people will only remember what you provide for them, what you have given them. And we said earlier that if you have convinced them and they now believe in your way, they will not consider what may be contradictory to their idea. Then the third idea is attitudes can have an implicit effect on social judgments. So what you have already in your mind, in your heart, in your behavior, what you have already been drawn to, what you're already in support of, it can color the way you see the world. Halo bias is, a halo is, sometimes if you're Catholic, you've seen the what are they called? They're not statues, what are they called? The ones that the statues that are in the churches, what's the official name? None of you is Catholic. Okay, so let's call them the statues that are there that's in the churches. Usually when they draw them, all the pictures, they draw that if it's somebody holy, they put something around to show this person is holy. So that is what that means. The halo bias is when I have already decided this person is good, they can never do any wrong, it will color everything I see about them. Even if I hear they did this, no, that is not possible. You hear people saying, no, that person can't do that. Because of that, I already created an impression earlier. So any information I get is now, it's like sifted through that bias. And I fail to consider things logically or openly, objectively, because I already have that idea. Then the mere exposure effect is the idea that as you are exposed to certain things, you become more inclined to see them as okay. And they do this in advertising. Sometimes in maybe like a Coke advertisement, you see girls skimpily dressed, hair done, makeup done. The advert is for Coke, but they are putting in these other things that are not really connected to Coke. But the more you are exposed to the advert as it is, the first time you saw it, you may have thought, that's not a Coke advert. Why don't they just bring the drink? And it becomes normal. It no longer seems like strange. Yes. So sometimes in adverts, they slip in things that are not really connected. And the more you are exposed to them, they become okay, until finally you see it and it doesn't even. So the idea that the more you are exposed to something, the more likely you are to begin to think, it's okay. If you think about the way the gay agenda is introduced, very often they don't come at you the very first time and say, you must. No. What has begun to happen is in cartoons, in movies, they bring a scene of just maybe a couple of men or a couple of women. And it's just in passing, you see it, and if you're very, very alert, you say, how can they put that in a cartoon, in a movie? Yeah. But it's just one scene. You won't refuse to watch the whole movie because of just one scene. Then the next time they do a bit longer, and you may be uncomfortable to begin with, but it's not too much. You say, it's okay, I can deal with it. But the more you are exposed to 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, soon it will be a whole program. By the time they make it a whole program of this is a reality show of you are used to it, like that, there's nothing strange about it. So that's the idea, that if you already have attitudes towards something, they can affect the way you see the world around you. They can make you think this person can never do any wrong, or this person can never do anything right, or just by being exposed to certain things that originally you were not drawn to, you begin to say, it's okay, I think it's okay. This is the world that we are living in. I think it will pass. So factors affecting attitude change. There are a number of things that you need to think about if for example, you want to push a policy and you know really it's attitude that will have to, the attitude has to change. And the effectiveness of the communication as you try to persuade people is whether people are actually paying attention, whether they understand what you're saying, and how well they accept the message, the messenger, and even the actual, the context of the message being given. So starting with the attention, if you are able to get people to actually pay you attention, they are more likely to hear what you're saying, understand it, ask questions about it, clarify what they don't understand, and if they were against it for no reason at all, you are more likely to convince them than if you do not have their attention at all. So when it comes to gatherings where people are making noise, people are rowdy a lot, you most probably will not be able to convince people because they are not paying you attention. But if you're able to get their undivided attention, you're more likely to move on a bit more, to convince them a bit more. Comprehension, you're thinking about the level of understanding. If a policy is to do with trade, with taxes, and you get people who are actually in trade, who are paying these taxes, who understand what happens, people in URA, people who, and you sit them down and say, no, this is what is happening. This tax is like this and this. And as you talk, they are able to actually understand what you're saying. You're more likely to convince them by getting people who understand what you're saying than if you get a first year class of, let's say, development studies, and you want to talk to them about the taxes that are paid at whatever level. They may have not even a single class of taxes in their course. Are they going to listen? Do they understand what you're saying? Most likely not. So you may not be able to convince them in any way, to persuade them. Acceptance depends on the characteristics of the three: the communicator, the communication, the context, the recipient. I think there are some more details as we go along. So for the communicator, do they have credibility? Part of what the Nigerian health policy used was actually get doctors to go and talk to people about immunization. But there was a particular doctor who was a Muslim doctor who was not in support of the immunization. So of course everybody listened to this doctor because he was a physician, he was Muslim, and he did not agree with them. But credibility is a very big thing. Just think about the times when you actually listen and believe what people are saying. So now I come here as a clinical psychologist. The first thing you think about is, okay, so what training do you have? What expertise in psychology do you have? What right do you have to be called a psychologist? If you have maybe boxes that you're ticking, if I fulfill all the boxes, then you listen to me and say, oh yeah, she may have something to say about psychology. But if you get someone off the street, I go to one day, I get a shopkeeper and bring them here and say, okay, someone who has done no psychology at all, and say, okay, tell these people about psychology. Your first question would be, what experience, what expertise do they have to tell us? Are they credible? The things they're going to tell us about psychology, do they know them? Do they understand them? Are they for real? So once someone is credible, you're more likely to persuade the audience.
Can I pose a question?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Are there times or chances where somebody can be credible but still not be taken serious?
Yes. Now, if we give an example of the Nigerian health, the vaccinations, there was that one Muslim doctor who said, no, let's not go for the... But there were lots and lots of scientists, of doctors, of researchers who told them, this is the vaccine, this is what it has in it, this is what has done in other countries. And they just did not believe. So it was characteristics of something else, not the communicator. It was more the recipient. So trustworthiness, can you trust them? Are you, do they have a track record of, yeah, they actually know what they're saying, they've done research, they've done something that shows that what they're saying is true. Then similarity to the recipient, this is important. So if you are talking to the youth, if you want to persuade the youth, if you can get a youthful person to go and talk to them, you're more likely to persuade them than if you get someone who is very, very different from them. Because one of the first things that people think about is, this person doesn't understand our situation. Yeah. They don't even know what we are going through. How can they even... But if someone is able to say, I get you, I understand, there's a way you feel a kinship towards this person. You say, okay, yes, what they're saying has some sense. Then the delivery of the message. A message has to be packaged well. It can be a very good message, very convincing. But if someone comes and just messes it, like maybe there's sometimes you've seen people stand up and they're shaking, they're nervous, they're stammering, so the message gets lost in somewhere in the delivery because the communicator is not communicating it well. So that is also something that will influence the attitude. Like it will reduce on the credibility. If you think, this person is a psychologist and yet they can't communicate psychology, facts and figures and confidently, there must be something wrong. And it reduces on other things that would have increased on the credibility. So that's the communicator. So as you package your message, the communicator, you need to take these things into consideration. Then there is the communication, the actual message that you're passing on. So, yes.
On the communicator, what about, I am assuming somebody is communicating to a group of people.
Or to one, or to one person.
Or to us, maybe. The appearance, can it have an effect?
Appearance?
The appearance?
Yes,
The physical appearance other than what you talk?
Yes, very, very. I think it's there somewhere. Okay, so it's not there as a point, but yes, that's very important. Okay. In some places, you go dressed in a particular way, and as soon as they see you, they close their ears. You will not communicate. There are some places for a man to go with braids, to talk to them. You won't get an audience. They are that traditional that as soon as they see you, they think, what kind of man is this who comes with braided hair? And yet, if it's the modern corporate world where it's accepted now, people can plait their hair, no one will think twice about it. But you go to the village, just a tip when you're doing your research, read your respondents carefully. There are some people you will go to, and when you start, you go as a girl, and then you immediately cross your legs, finish. That's the end of the interview. They will not give you any more information. Or there are ways that some people will expect you to address them. You don't do that. So reading the audience is very important for the communicator. So the communication includes things within the message that might have an effect. So the level of discrepancy, things like we earlier talked about, do you present both sides of the message? Even if you want to persuade, many of us think if you want to persuade people, just tell them what you want them to come towards. Tell them what you want to convince them towards. But research has shown if you present them with both sides, and then you explain why you would want them to change, what attitude you want them to gain, it's much better than trying to just tell them either only the negatives so that they run away from the negatives, or only the positives so that they can't just run towards the positives. You present both, a balanced argument, and then they're able to decide, okay, so you said this, you said that, I think we'll choose that. So that links up with the second one as well. So two-sided communications are better for persuasion than one-sided communications. Then the order of presentations. You may find differing ideas here in books or in research, but most people say what is said first is remembered more. It's more likely to remember the things that are presented first. If it's a long message, of course, if you think about it, if it's a 2-hour lecture, by the 1.5 hour, the last 30 minutes, people may be tired, people may be thinking about what is going to happen next. Maybe they left something at home that they have to attend to, they have another lecture, they may be distracted. But something that is that is presented first, most probably will be remembered. And that is why it's important, as you organize a presentation, to be able to say, we are going to talk about this, and like present an outline at the beginning so that people can pick out and know what to expect in the presentation. The framing is like, what kind of a context do you put it in, the message that you are giving. There was a time in the USA when in order to, in an effort to stop drug abuse and alcohol use among younger children and teens, they would use fear messages. They would show them videos of things that have, cars that have crashed, people's lungs that have become black, and that, at that time, they thought that was having an impact. But what happened, as research showed, was that would have an impact right there and then. But for long-term impact, after a while you forget. Something may scare you so much today, but you won't have the same level of fear tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So after like a week, the kids who were so scared and they were swearing, I'll never do it again, they've forgotten how bad it was and they go back. So that's the fear arousal, but the context, the framing is the context in which you put it in. I want to help you change behavior. Am I going to present it in, as far as in the context of fear? Am I going to present it in the context of your health? Am I going to present it in the context of your goals? You have goals to attain, you have a life to live, and without, if you don't do this, then you won't be able to attain this. So the way you package the message is very important. Accidental messages. Sometimes we are giving a message, but other messages kind of slip through and are given. They were not the main messages, they were not the focus, but somehow they come through. So as you present the persuasion message, you have to be aware of these. Sometimes accidental messages are used. In advertising, sometimes they do it intentionally. They put in something, just a flash of something. It appears accidental, but because the human mind is the way it is, it will catch on it, it will draw it the attention, and you'll be able to see it or to remember it. You may watch a whole movie, and the only thing you remember is something that was not even a major part of the movie. And because they understand that's the way the human mind works, the human brain works, they may have put it in that way, because they know, yeah, people will remember. So as you package the message, you can use it officially, you can put it in formally, or you need to be aware of anything that may come through that was not intended but will come through just because of the nature of the way you're presenting your message. And we talked about the exposure. The more you're exposed to something, the more you become used to it, the more you think it's okay, the more you think, then before you know it, something that you were so much against, you're thinking, it's okay, it's not that bad. The context, forewarning is, sometimes when a message is given, you are informed beforehand. This is what is going to happen. These days, whether it's on social media or a news bulletin or on the TV, if a message, if a clip is graphic, it has maybe violence and what, sometimes they'll forewarn you, they'll tell you, the next few minutes will be
Explicit content.
Yes, please be aware of that. If you don't want to be part of it, you turn off or you lower the volume or something like that. So how do you use this in your desire to change attitudes? Once people are given a bit of forewarning, they are able to decide what they'll be part of, what information that they will take. If they are not, then you can bombard people with messages, and like we said, this may not be the most or appropriate way of changing people's attitudes, because it may create fear, but it may not have a long-lasting effect. Inoculation is building resistance to the influence of attack messages. So sometimes, if you think of the way, what are they called? Jehovah's Witnesses witness. So they'll come to you, and other people as well who witness. They'll come to you, they'll give you the message, they'll tell you their gospel, they'll tell you what they expect you to do. Most of them, even if you send them away, they'll still come back. But if you have already had a bit of the message, and you are decided that I am not going to be part of this, I am not going to listen, I'm not going to be convinced, then the next person who comes, the first message has kind of immunized you against the force of the message. So you're able to take the little that you had, and some, even as soon as they start, say, no, I've had that before, I'm not going to be part of it. Or because of the little you had, you're able to counter the attack. So a little bit of information can inoculate people against the force of persuasion. So you would need to see, how do I use this? Am I able to use that characteristic in people. Do I just bombard them? Do I provide the information so that they are able to work with it rather than just without forewarning? It just comes to them like an attack. But if they receive a little bit, they are harder to convince because they keep building up the resistance against the message. So the other part of that would be, if you are going to give a message, then prepare it and give it. Don't just give a tiny bit of it and then you expect that when you come back, you will have audience to give the whole message. So if you wanted to persuade people, prepare a good message, taking into consideration the things that we've talked about the communication, and now the context, so that they receive the full message. You don't give them a chance to get a little bit and then go back, so that the next time they're not even willing to listen to even the little bit. And then the recipient, you who is receiving the message, or your audience, if you think about the audience. A number of things will determine how much you can persuade them. One is self-esteem. People who have high self-esteem are confident in who they are, what they believe. They've kind of thought through, this is who I am. I don't need to be different. So when you come to them and say, have you thought about this? Would you want to do this differently? This is a better way. Most people who have a high self-esteem will be able to stand and say, no, this is what I believe, and I believe it because of this and this. So I don't really want to be part of that. If yours is better, they are not threatened. So they will be able to say, okay, let me consider this. It seems to be better than what I was thinking. Yeah, I think I'll consider it. So self-esteem is a quality that you may need to think about as you want to persuade people. Intelligence, we talked about the cognitive abilities. Are you talking at the level of your audience? If you're talking above them and they don't understand, you may not be able to convince them. Or you may be able to convince them in a way that they applaud. If you think of campaign rallies and political, they might say, yeah. But as far as actually convincing them, moving them from where they are to where you want them to be, that may be a completely different. And yet when you sit with somebody who this person understands, I'm explaining issues and they understand, so that they get to the point where they can say, okay, yeah, this is different from what I was thinking. So I need to change in this way, and they are able to do that. You may get longer lasting change in that way than the people who make a lot of noise but they haven't understood what you're saying. The mood, people who are in so the mood, when you talk about mood, you think about sad, happy, depressed. If you are in a normal mood, like you are alert, you are willing to listen, you're not overly depressed or too excited, that's the most opportune mood to listen and understand and get what the other person is. If it's too much excitement, again, campaign rallies, people have danced and run, and it's not really a good opportunity to be convinced. It's an opportunity for excitement, for a lot of noise, but not really for a logical change of position. So the mood, someone needs to be in the kind of mood that they are able to listen, able to get what you're saying, and kind of process it without any external influence. Gender. It has always been said that women are more easily convinced than men. And one of the examples that was given is, if you look at the churches around, the new churches, very often when you go inside, it's many more female than male. So when a new thing comes, women are more likely to adventure and say, okay, let's go see this new pastor, this new what, this new. So you may need to think about the gender. If do you need to actually sit and lay out your strategies, or do you just need to talk, explain advantage, disadvantage? So if it's a mixed group, you may have to strike that balance of, I need to provide the statistics and also a bit of the excitement and the maybe highlight what would be the benefits and the positive influence of this policy.
I'd want to think that on this slide, with a point of mood, it's not easy, or it's literally impossible to pass on a message and all people receive it the way you want it to be sent to them.
That's true. That's true. But if, let me give maybe an extreme example. There are times when a community has had something major happen and they are in a general mood. So we've heard of these mass shootings. Now, people are mourning, people are sad, people are thinking about death, and you come and you want to pass on a message. Or if you think of those places where there's a carnival, if you've ever passed through Kampala and everybody's in very elevated levels of excitement, and you think that people will listen and understand and logically know. But generally speaking, everybody's usually in different levels. But so one-on-one, it would be easier to gauge and say, okay, this person is in a mood to listen. Generally speaking, you see, you gauge and see, are they listening? Are they, if it's first thing in the morning, if it's last thing at night, it may be more difficult to try and get people to engage with material. So these are things that you need to think about. Generally, in groups or even one-on-one, how best can I pass on my message? If my purpose is to persuade, how best can I pass it on?
Okay.
So this is a model that has been put forward of how people actually convince others. It's called the Elaboration Likelihood Model, and it was developed by Siapo and Petty in 1984. So what he says is persuasion goes through two routes. Now, persuasion is, you're here, I want you to move to here. How do I get you to move? Without forcing you, without coercing you, but by presenting you a message, communicating a message, so that you engage with it, and you yourself decide, okay, I am going to move here. So one way, he says, is what he calls the central route. He says, in this case, a listener finds the message interesting. So it's something that they have chosen. An example would be, you are in this class, you are part of this class, you chose, no one forced you to do MRPP. So hopefully, it doesn't happen at the same level all the time, but hopefully, when you come to class, you're engaged, you're saying, I want to learn this material, I want to use it, I will need it when I leave. So you're at a level of interest that someone else who never chose MRPP, who has never wanted to be in the class, will not be. So the listener finds the message interesting, important, and personally relevant, and is willing to consider the content in a thoughtful manner. So the extent of persuasion depends on the quality of the message. So it's like you're already converted. So the level, the magnitude of the persuasion, how much you will be persuaded, will really depend on the quality of the message. If I was trying to convince you about something now, it will really depend on how I present it, how it has been prepared, the examples I give, the level you see, okay, yeah, actually, yeah, this is something worth considering. But you are already converted to a degree because it's something you already find interesting. The other route is what is called the peripheral route. So if you're thinking like of a road, the road is the central route is the main way. The peripheral is like the pavement, the side, the pathway. How can people get convinced in that way? So in situations where the listener finds the message uninteresting, so you happen to be going past the Koyoyo and there is, what should I say, maybe a cookery class. Some of you may be interested in cooking, but there's a cookery class and it's really something you're not interested in. you just happen to be passing by. So you find the message uninteresting. The extent of persuasion depends on the quantity of arguments and persuasive cues. So in a situation where you're not really interested, it will depend on how much this person talks, how much they try to convince you, the quality of the argument, the persuasive cues, how the ways in which they are able to, maybe examples they give, statistics, that kind of. And also, that's why we were talking about this earlier, also the attractiveness and the status of the communicator. So we've just had elections here on campus. And at election time, whether it's nationally, at MP level, I've often had people say, oh, that guy looks good, I'll give him my vote. Yes, just attractiveness for some people just gets them votes. If you remember Obama, how cool he was. He got, some of the votes he got was because he was so cool, he was so nice, such a gentleman, and it was like, yeah, that's the one we should give. Some people are able to persuade, not because they have, are able to be persuaded, not because they have, the argument is, the message is good or it's logical, but just by the presentation. Like someone comes and you're impressed, you say, yeah, now this is the one I will follow. So the first one, you're interested in the message, you listen to it, you listen to the arguments, but you're already converted really. So it's the quality, how much they stimulate you to think through things and convince you. This one, it's like you're really not engaging with the material. It's just that they bombard you with lots and lots and lots of arguments, and also added advantage of attractiveness and status. So if a president comes, you listen to him, not because you may like what he says, but because he's the president. And sometimes in his message, he puts in some things, you listen and you're convinced, not because you intended to listen and be convinced, but because of his position as the president. Yeah, you might know something about that. I think I will follow. So that is the peripheral route. So both may produce the same amount of attitude change initially. So you may see people seem to change. You may see people begin to do things differently. But the central route produces attitude change that is longer lasting. So when people have already thought through it, they have already, they can logically follow the argument, and you have convinced them. That change that comes from that is longer lasting than people who have they just happen to be there, and you convince them with saying lots and lots and lots of things. Or just by your attractiveness, they thought, we'll follow him just because of that. So the better way to use is the central route, where you can actually present your argument, and the quality of the argument actually really matters, rather than just trying to persuade people to follow you when you've not invested a lot in the message. I don't know where I should go into. Okay, yes. So another theory that you will find when it comes to attitude change is one that is called cognitive dissonance theory. So cognitive is to do with the thinking. Dissonance is the idea that of tension or discomfort or... So giving an example of maybe someone who smokes. Have you seen doctors who actually smoke? Yeah. Doctors who smoke. And you go to their office and say, I have a chest pain, and they're busy saying, you know, what do they say when it comes to convincing people not to smoke? Or talking about things like lung cancer, and they don't talk about it. What do you think is going inside them? What is going on inside them as they... So I am a doctor, I have been a doctor for 5-6 years, but I smoke, I am addicted and I smoke. And a client, a patient comes in, and they have the same problem, and I can see if they do not stop if they don't stop immediately, they are starting to develop complications. their chest, their throat, their... Give us your idea.
Yeah, I'm saying they may lack the moral authority
Mm-hmm.
to talk about it, maybe give about their negatives, about the effect.
So do you think they don't say anything about it at all?
Some doctors are too smart that they will tell you, just like other people say, do what I say, but don't do what I do. So some of them will confidently tell you, please, smoking is not good. You don't need to do this because these are the effects, A, B, C, D. But at the end of the day, for the message that they are preaching is not working for them.
So would it work for you? What were you going to say?
My submission on this is that though these people are doctors, by that time comes when they themselves, they lose it. They feel, yes, I'm a practicing doctor, but I think I am really not worthy to talk about such a subject. And so in most cases, those whom I've engaged with, tend to simply shy off or
Just
simply
don't say
refer
anything
you.
about it.
Yes, they refer you to someone who does not smoke. They will smartly just tell you, no, there is that doctor, he's a specialist in this field. He can help you better than I can do. I can work on this and this.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I could add. For me, I will share my personal experience, not my personal experience, but a very close experience with a friend of mine. He was a doctor, and as an individual, he has been guilty. He feels guilty over time. And this is the gentleman who would... Thank you. And this is a gentleman who would try to quit smoking. Being a doctor, he would try to quit smoking because each time he interfaces with patients who are suffering maybe from TB or suffering maybe from TB or smoking related diseases, he actually often feels so guilty, and he promised himself to quit, and yet each time however much he promised himself to quit, he usually goes back to it because of the addictiveness. So whereas they feel the guilt that smoking is not good, because if they interface with patients and they're in position ethically to advise what is the right thing to be done, they usually feel that guilt, and that has always affected them.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so maybe smoking may be an extreme example because there's an element of addiction. Even if you may want to stop but still find it very, very difficult to stop. The idea of dissonance is that you believe something, you want to do something so strongly, but what you're doing is different. So it says when people have two incompatible cognitions, they experience dissonance, which they attempt to relieve. So imagine what goes on in this doctor's mind when he knows he's actively smoking, but now here is a patient who needs to be told, you need to stop smoking. If not, there are going to be complications. If not, next year you'll be gone. If not, imagine the tension that goes on. And this is me, but the me that I'm supposed to be should be something else. And there's that
I think this is what Apostle Paul says when he says that for the things that I want to do, I don't do. And the things I don't want to do, they're the ones that I do.
Yes.
So such cases need deliverance, spiritual clinic.
Yes, that may be so. Yeah. They may also need counseling, they may also need a number of things. So this is what we call cognitive dissonance. So in that state, when people are in that state, so it may not be as extreme as I'm a smoker, I am addicted and I can't stop and I have to tell someone. It may be just daily things. You are caught in a situation where you have to make their incompatible decisions, cognitions that you have. So what people do is either they change attitudes and behaviors. So I feel like this is what I feel. So in order for what I feel to be the same as how I behave, I change one. Because I cannot go very long, I can't survive very long with that, just that tension of thinking, I am fake, I should be doing this, but I'm doing this, I should be, no. What people usually do is, they change attitudes and behaviors, or they add consonant information or downplay the importance of inconsistency in attitudes and behaviors. So they begin to say, it's not that important. After all, it's not a big part of my life. I think we can go with that. So that the thing that they actually really believed now begins to seem like not very important. Or they avoid dissonance by avoiding situations that are likely to create it. If you know that every time I go to that room, they ask me, so how is it going? You said you were working on this. In order to avoid that tension that comes from being faced with, this is who I am and this is who I'm supposed to be, I avoid that situation completely. I don't go there anymore. When I see them coming, I go the other way. I just avoid it completely so that in my mind, I can be at peace. So when you have a situation where you can choose, when you are supposed to choose, when people have to choose between two equally desirable alternatives, they will experience dissonance and will attempt to reduce their post-decisional dissonance by changing their evaluations of the two alternatives. Let me explain that first before we move on. Okay. So you are in a situation where you have a choice. They're equal, I mean, there's no, if you think of being in a restaurant and you're choosing a meal, at the point where for those of you who were average students, like you're doing well in everything and you get to the point where you're like, okay, I need to choose what I'm going to do in HSC. Do I do sciences? Do I do arts? Some people really have a tug of war there because they like both. They don't really mind either. They're doing all of them well. So they're like, So what happens at that point, the cognitive dissonance theory says, is they increase the value of the chosen alternative. So if I make a choice, so I should have done, maybe I got 3 in all my subjects. So I decided, I'm going to do sciences. After I have made my choice, then I begin to, in my mind, I begin to elevate the sciences above the arts. So I begin to say, sciences are better, sciences are more marketable. So even though I didn't think like that before, but because I have made the choice, now I begin to, or I decrease the value of the rejected alternative. So I didn't take arts. I said, anyway, people who do arts float a lot. They don't get jobs. There are so many, they don't get university sponsorship. So one or the other. The one that I've chosen, I make it look much better than it is. Or the one I did not choose, I make it look worse. So as to support what my choice was. Is it true? Does it happen? Is this true?
I have an example. Mm-hmm. When I was playing basketball, I had a teammate. He was addicted to drugs. But his performance used to be high when he has his drugs. And each time he used not to use them, you could really tell. Yes, sorry about that. You could tell. So what happens? The coach summons him one time and tells him, you know what? You either quit basketball or you quit drugs. But you can't do both when you're on my team. Well, he reduced one. He reduced coming on court and did more of drugs, unfortunately.
Oh.
Yeah. The story.
And for him, as you said, the earlier part, he may have been able to justify it to himself, saying, when I take, I perform better.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. Now you who is persuading him to change, you have to have a viable alternative.
Yeah.
Especially if someone says, I do better on this than. Okay, so that's cognitive dissonance. In situations where you are forced to make a choice, or forced to behave in a certain way. When people are required to behave in ways that are counter to their private attitudes, they change either their behavior or their attitude to reduce dissonance. So when it's I am forced, I really have no choice. I mean, we've seen people who, whether as political victims or they are forced, I mean, as far as they are concerned, they really did not make a free choice. Some people will say, no, this country is free, you can make up, but we know that sometimes people have been forced to do certain things. So they are saying that when they are forced to behave differently from what their attitudes are, they change either their behavior or their attitude. They convince themselves, maybe this is okay, maybe this is really what it was supposed to be. Maybe
it is God.
Mm-hmm. Or so they either their behavior or their attitude, and they justify it just so that within them they are okay. Even though they were forced, they are okay. Yes.
Now I'm trying to ask, can we have an example under that of the first policy of public order management bill?
Give us
like maybe you are planning to have a rally somewhere, then all of a sudden the police refuses you. So you need to find now ways of trying to console yourself.
Yes, yes. I'm sure you've seen it happening with these concerts and what. And you have to find a way for you to feel good about it. You see, anyway, there was a lot of insecurity. It was expected that there would be terrorists. So
stadium is small.
Yes. So you find a way. It's just natural. The cognitive dissonance theory says it's natural for you to change behavior, change attitude, so that you reduce that dissonance of, I really would have wanted to do it this way, but I'm not able to do it. Then if there is insufficient justification, there are some cases in which you really, historically you have believed, you have had certain attitudes, but whether it's out of the blue, people have different ways of describing it. You behave differently, you act differently. Some people say, it's out of character, there are many ways but so people do not usually experience discomfort when their counter-attitudinal behaviors are the result of strong coercion, strong norms, or an offer of a large reward. So if you are forced to do something different from what you believe, but you were forced, you were beaten, you were threatened with death, you were threatened with all kinds of things, or you are in a situation where you cannot do otherwise. We talked about the cultures where you have to dress in a certain way. Maybe there was really no way you could do what you wanted. You just had to do what was expected in that situation. Or you were convinced with a large reward. We've seen people swindle loads of money, very, very big amounts of money. And they will, I've not seen anyone personally, but I can imagine that they will justify. People say, my children have to eat. They have to go to school. I have to build a house. I have to, you justify it. So if the large reward, if you have a large reward, and the large reward is what has convinced you to go against your own attitude, your own personal attitudes, you're able to justify it. The dissonance is not as much as when there's no reward. So what they are saying is, if there is no external justification, insufficient external justification, it becomes very, very hard to justify it to yourself. That you have, it's like you've betrayed yourself, gone against your own attitudes for something that...
For a small frog.
Yes, that's the expression. Some people have that expression. If you're going to eat a frog,
eat a big one.
Juicy one. But if you really go through the experience of eating a frog and eat a skinny one, no. No one understands it. You can't justify that. So there is more discomfort when you are convinced to do something against what you believe, what you strongly believe, what you have always stood for, just for a very small reward. For a big reward, you can justify it. if you've been forced and threatened, you can justify it. But for a big reward, for a insufficient one,
I one time found a traffic officer, and he was accusing me for having taken over through another lane that I was not supposed to. And then when I put it on the side, he stopped me, and then I was like, okay, I'm sorry, forgive me. Then he said, you mean you will just go like that? Then I said, I don't have anything. Maybe I can get for you. I was asking another person in the car, you have there 5,000? Then he says, I want foreign currency. I don't want that. Just I called it the indigenous. I don't want indigenous breed here.
but what does that mean?
It was like he wanted a big offer.
Converted from dollar.
Yeah, if I'm to take something, I'll better take something
Yes.
big.
Because now, if you imagine this is somebody who is usually law-abiding,
Yes.
and he is, maybe there are sometimes when their bosses move around, and he takes 5K from you, and as he's taking it, his boss comes and nabs him. There would be no justification for.
Yes.
But if he had his millions in his pocket, then he could say, yeah, yeah.
Go with this one.
So these are ideas from psychology that as you think through public policy, developing it, creating it, implementing it, actually going to the grassroots and making it work, psychology has a big part to play because you are actually working with people. They need to be persuaded. Most of the policies that come up take some persuasion. It's not that you will find large amounts of people who support it anyway.
Even at agenda setting. Agenda setting.
From the very beginning, with your fellow public policy developers, even there,
Yeah, it's called PR.
you have to present it and say, okay, this is what I'm thinking. Convince people to come onto your team so that you can actually push it forward. And if you have this, if you think about the way you've packaged your message, how your message would be more likely to be received, what modes of persuasion should you use, you will come up with a better message, a more credible message than if you just say, these people, I'm an MP anyway, they will listen to me. Some people will listen, but like we said, if you don't get the right combination, they will listen, they'll make a lot of noise, you think that they have been convinced or persuaded, but they'll go away and they'll have forgotten it in a very short time. So questions of anything that we've talked about, any other things that may have come up as we talked? Any questions?
I think sometimes as we're looking at some of the reasons why effective in policy communication, we talked of a certain key point that involved trust. I'm concerned with the whole point of trust because I've just witnessed how the whole Bududa issue has been mismanaged just because of trust. And the person here who is in charge, I think the institution is government. And when you're working for government, I believe you really find it difficult. If at all now you're struggling to explain to people the reasons as to why their plight is really not taken into context, and then you're trying to tell them move, landslides will again come back, and they are not willing. They are saying we are willing to die from here. I think that's such a big dilemma, and those are lessons for us policy students. And to me, I got it very well in that context when you introduced that whole point of attitude and trust. I don't know what other members have to say.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Maybe that for the issue of public policy, how would such attitude, such deep-rooted attitude, be solved? How can such people be helped? For example, we have a crisis like that one of Budoda, and people are saying, no, we better stay here. We better die from here because this is our ancestry. So I'm worried. You're seeing another scenario coming, and you would want to help these people out of this, but the attitude is a no. I just want to imagine what would be the appropriate way to address such an issue. If you are government, what would you do?
Your take?
I'll say something.
Okay, go ahead.
If I was government, I would seek for the people who are the most influential. I don't care how much millions I'm going to spend on them. Who are most influential. If it's the leaders, if it's the cultural leaders, if it's their pastors, they are the ones I would go to.
You've done it, and the attitude is also no.
And that is also no.
Yes.
It cannot be no.
It can't be no.
It cannot be no for all of them. No. This is it. It cannot be no. It cannot be no for all of them.
The same degree.
Maybe the degree.
Yes.
Maybe some of them may say yes, and others may say no.
To my thinking, I think it is just the aspect of persuasion. You look at the key voices, the key stakeholders. Then, after you have met them, obviously at the end of the deliberation, you'll go with some, and there will be a sect that will remain unconvinced. Then you use the convinced to convince the unconvinced. By the time you come,
the unconvinced.
so you find by the time you come, that's when maybe you might use a reward or something, but when the convincing has done some bigger part.
You can give them some these BMWs.
Yes, it helps.
Yeah.
If need be. If need be. Yeah,
Someone earlier mentioned participation. Very, very important. Because when government does things and you're like, government has done this, government has done that, it's very hard for one person there to come and say, okay, be part of this. You didn't consult us when it was starting, you didn't consult us, you brought other people to come and maybe implement it, why should we be part of it? But when from the beginning there is participation, grassroots participation, the leaders are involved, it becomes a bit easier. There are some things that are very hard, like you said, that now moving people from one, because even the leaders may not want to move, but all of them are not convinced to the same degree. That if you go back to read the story, the Nigerian polio boycott, it may give you some ideas of how one by one you convince them. We mentioned how in the end, that discussion of where should they send the sample to. First they said, let's send it to this America or wherever, places where there are good labs, and the people refused. Every single person in these states refused. They said, no, those are the West, that's where the vaccine is coming from. They are going to even make it worse. We do not want to send it there. So finally they agreed. They've got some people from the community to discuss, so what do we do? And they said, okay, bring the sample, we send it to a place of our choice, and we send people of our choice to see what is happening. So they send it to Indonesia, they send some people, representatives, to actually make sure that what is done, they'll come back and report and say, yes, our tests were actually done. And that's what happened. In the end, they were able to come back and report. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. Even up to that point, even now, there are still some people who are not for vaccination, but not as strongly as when the cultural leaders, the religious leaders, the political leaders said, no, don't go. There were so many, but now at least some of them were convinced, persuaded to be part of the polio vaccination. Yes.
I think I have some reaction on attitude. Several times in Uganda, when an event occurs, maybe a landslide, maybe the Bijambia people, then you hear people say, government etuyambe. Oh, literally meaning let the government come in. Could that be a persuasion or a point of view, or it's a weakness on the public? What is your take about it?
What do people think? What do people think?
They keep on saying government atuyambe, Museveni atuyambe, such as, is that, should we think that they have that element of attitudinal attachment to government, or?
I think this also is an orientation from government. The way government does its things. For example, when the president does not come out to speak about something or to say something to be done, nothing is done. So in the long run, people attach a service to a particular individual. You've seen even people no longer trust, they no longer go to institutions. You've seen people, even border guys, stopping the president over tax issues that they would go to authorities that could help. But because the president, or if you're the one you have done it, that if you're the father, if the father does not say take the milk, you can never run to the mother. Every time you wait for the father to say take the milk. And this is a kind of, I can call a kind of umbrella that you're putting on a particular individual as opposed to the institutions that would help arrest some of these issues.
I personally think these people look at the levels of leadership and who can help them immediately or who can help them wholesomely or largely.
But it's a sign of failure.
I'm still coming to
It's
you.
okay.
Now, instead of them maybe running to an LC, they think if they make an alarm to the government at large or to a president, their issue is likely to be heard than when it's taken to a lower level.
Which says, which like you said, it's a weakness in places where things work, and even at the lowest office, the police at the next will come and do what needs to be done. You want to go to the central police station in town, but that doesn't happen here. So
I think it's a policy weakness somewhere.
policy, is it policy or just the institutions or?
Or institutional breakdown,
I
or
think this is under presidentialism. That issue is under presidentialism. How can a thing happen like in Mukono and the LC1 up to LC5 cannot come in to convince the people or to solve the problem, and this problem waits for when President Museveni comes in to tell this man who has bought chunks of land and is sending away people to stop. And even at the end of the day, the man comes to the press and says, I cannot go away because this is my land. I have here the land titles. And even the president comes in to plead guilty.
no, it's the way he packages the communication, or
This is
how
what
he
we are saying.
communicates.
This is what we are saying, that it is an orientation from the government. Government has put it that way, that's how they want things to be done. It is the big man's thing.
Okay, last person, because we are out of time.
Before he comes in to say the last word, the other day I was listening to one East African member of parliament, that is Mukasa-Bide. He described Uganda as a democratic state. In his argument, he pointed it that in a country where there is no institutional development, or the institutions are actually failing, then everyone will look at the president as the alpha and the omega. In other words, he adopts his argument of the big man syndrome, where everything begins and ends with the big man. And I think that is where it is not really an attitude in my view, but it is the system, the institutions which is failing, that is making citizens to believe that it is only the president who can solve. And indeed, the president has also demonstrated, unfortunately, instead of empowering the institutions to do their work, he has actually come out and appreciated the cry from the public in a manner that he comes out and deal with it as an individual. He pours in money instead of focusing on the institutions that can leverage these needy citizens. So I think in one way or another, it may not be attitude, but it is just a system which is failing, and a policy has to address it.
Last one.
My friends have said it well. However, I'll just only add one last thing, that our personalities, how we structure ourselves as leaders, we communicate a lot, actually. Every one of us is a leader. And how you want things to happen communicates a lot about you. As my brothers here have said, I was a victim of land eviction just within Mukono here. But that man, at some point when he was vacating me, I was talking to him on phone, and one thing he told me was that even if you go to State House, nothing will happen. So it took President Museveni himself to come on site to suppress that man. What does it mean? That all these commissions which are in place, there is no IGG. IGG is not in place. It's not functional. All these courts are not functional. So ideally, Uganda is Museveni and Museveni is Uganda. If he says it, it happens.
Yeah. And you guys are the ones who are going to be the next breed of policy developers, policy implementers.
I want to disagree with him, because to say that Museveni is Uganda and Uganda is Museveni, I think this is absolutely wrong. And this
Maybe
is,
that's what
this is the attitude. This is the attitude that we need to change with the policy. Yes. Yes.
This is the attitude, yes.
This is the attitude we need to change with policy.
My friend, there are some people when you change attitude, you will still stay there. You change your attitude, you go.
Okay,
but you stay there, you don't come put him away.
Thank you very much. I think someone else will be coming in at 4 o'clock.
The peripheral route.
So please look at your outline. There are other psychology ideas that overlap with public policy, leadership, followership, some others I can't remember. If you have the time, look them up. I mean, just need to Google, get academic articles and see what it says. Okay, thank you very much.